My name's Tom Krohn. I work at a company called Antidote, and we're a digital company helping patients connect to research and researchers connect to patients. Because unfortunately, there's still a big gap, and that's a gap we're trying to close. So my background's in pharmacy. And in fact, I grew up in a small town drugstore in small town North Dakota. And I've been in medical throughout my career, which is about 30 years at this point. And it's been a mixture of international development. So I was fortunate to live and work in Madagascar for 10 years, helping build a nonprofit organization there. I came back, got back into hospital practice. I've worked in hospitals and in pharmacies. Fundamentally, really got convinced that the challenges of healthcare were really the systems and the management of healthcare. Felt I had gifts in those areas, pursued a graduate degree down in Texas, and eventually landed in the pharmaceutical industry. And I worked at Eli Lilly for 13 years. And throughout that time, it was always in the clinical and regulatory space, especially clinical trials, in changing and innovating in how clinical trials were done. Not so much from the scientific point of view, but from an operational point of view, from a business operations point of view. And then importantly, in the latter 4 or 5 years at Lilly, was about external engagement, particularly working with patients differently. One of the fundamental things we held to was listening and listening to patients. What's the perspective from a patient? And unfortunately, it's true that once you're in the industry or you're a researcher, you tend to think through the lens of your science, maybe your study, maybe your site or your hospital. And it's important to really think through the lens of what's it like on the other side, particularly for patients. And one of the things we clearly heard, and we actually brought in patients and did a variety of workshops, etc., was that practical reality is patients are not looking for a specific study. They're not looking for a Lilly study or a Johns Hopkins study. They're looking for a study that might help them. The assumption here is that these are patients who are not having their healthcare met by standard of care. And that's not unusual in rare disease. It's not unusual in diseases that are complex. And so oncology and cancer is a good example of that, where unfortunately the diagnosis of those diseases is a tough prognosis. It's a tough outcome. And so the new therapies are really coming through research. But how do you think of that from a patient point of view? And we focused in on really listening. And practical aspects are things like it's hard for patients to find studies that are relevant to them. And that's because researchers generally communicate from a scientific point of view only, from a my study point of view, and arguably a lot of the research is communicated publicly for the sake of compliance because they have to, and that's very important for the transparency initiatives and such. But it's really not to help patients to engage. So we thought about it and worked on how do we help patients understand their options. And we actually built some technology that allowed us to automatically match patients to trials. If the patient knows their profile, why can't we help them find a study, any study? Not only do they want to find, they want to understand them. How do you engage patients from their point of view? And often it's a nomenclature or language challenge. And yeah, it's science, and there's still a lot of scientific concepts, but there are ways to do things in an interactive way with patients. And an example that I typically use is if I were talking to a nurse, she would ask me if I've had a heart attack before. She would not ask me if I've had a myocardial infarction. And so the language we use often is a barrier, or it can be used in a way to help patients engage and understand. And ultimately, to us, a big part of that is not only do you have information, but what can you do with it? And that's how do you take it to the next step? How do you take it to your doctor to talk about? How do I understand where the hospitals are that are running these? And I can go learn more about these studies. All kinds of next steps, because it's one thing to be aware, but it's much more to actually engage and be able to follow through. So we focused on that. Ultimately, we had some good success, and Lilly chose to spin out the technology, the platform, the process that we had, primarily because Lilly was not in the service business. Lilly is in the drug development business, and it could not represent all the studies out there. And if you are serious about serving patients first, you have to give them all the options. So that technology and capabilities was literally sold to a company called TrialReach, which is now Antidote. We just renamed ourselves. Myself and three of my colleagues actually chose to leave Lilly and continue what we started because we believe in what we're doing. And there's such a great need here. So we're involved in bringing that to people. We do that through partners. We're honored to be part of phaware's community and be a partnership with them to help serve their constituents. But we actually have over 250 of these type of partners. And it's because we take on the challenge of bringing order to trials, and we make it available to partners like phaware. And it's really to help patients and to close this gap between patients and research. It turns out the problem is just as much on the other side as well. Researchers have a hard time finding patients, and we help researchers connect to patients as well. In fact, if you look at PH, pulmonary hypertension, there are over 90 studies currently recruiting or about to recruit in the US. And if you look at how many patients they need 21,000 plus patients just to fill the US studies. Well, there's estimated to be 30,000 PH patients in the US. That's over 60%, 70% of all people with a known diagnosis of PH are necessary to participate in studies. The point is, there's a real demand on the research side, and we know that patients with tough diseases like pulmonary hypertension are interested in the new therapies, are interested in new options. We're really here to close the gap between the two. So Antidote has made a capability we call Match. We bring order to the clinical trials. So we actually start with clinicaltrials.gov, and then we have a team and some capabilities to bring clarity to all those rules. In fact, there are over 2,000 ways to say the patient cannot be pregnant. So we have to bring some order to that. So that's what we do. And all that's on our side. Fundamentally, a patient, if they came to phaware and they saw what we call the match widget or the link there, they would be brought into a match environment as if a patient walked into a hospital and wanted to talk to someone about what studies might be relevant to them, what research. I'm still struggling and I'm interested in research options. The interaction with the hospital person, let's say it's a nurse, would not be presenting them with a set of rules. The nurse would start to ask a series of questions. Well, how old are you? And what diagnosis do you have? And we've got hospitals around the area or network around the area. How far are you willing to travel? And then they'd start to get into the questions that are more specific to the studies. And that's fundamentally what our match does. It presents questions to patients, and as they answer questions, depending on their answer, it removes the studies which they're no longer relevant to them. So if it's only for pediatrics and you tell us you're 40 years old, those pediatric studies for kids are not relevant to you. And as you answer questions, you get fewer and fewer studies, and you can watch the number go down. What's important is those studies that remain are still relevant to you. And so it's not a recommendation engine. What it is really especially to take the noise out of the system is the way I like to think about it, and help patients understand their options. And those parameters can be changed. I'm willing to travel farther, all those type of things. But ultimately, it's helping patients understand their option. That's our match process. And then if you click through, you can then see which hospitals and which, we call them sites in the business, are running those, because it may not be the hospital here, but it may be 5 miles away or whatever within the tolerance of your distance. And so ultimately, you're getting options and be able to execute and engage in those options. We are on a journey to cover all studies. We keep our platform up to date every night. And if there's a change, if there's a new, if there's a subtraction, whatever it is, we're keeping our platform up to date because currency really matters, and it matters to patients. Our goal is clearly that instead of thinking ct.gov first, you think Antidote, because we are basically clinicaltrials.gov, but now easy to use, easy to understand, and clear calls to action. And we don't think about bringing people to Antidote, but we think about bringing trials to where the patients are. It's why we have our partnership network. And I think over time, you'll see us fill out the rest of the studies across more and more rare diseases in different areas, therapeutic areas, and help patients wherever they are to find the research that's relevant to them. We've worked closely with phaware leadership, its communities, its researchers, and we're always looking to improve our product, looking to improve our service for patients. That helps both patients, it helps researchers find patients, all that's involved there. So we're glad and honored to be part of the PH community, just like we are with other communities. and we'd welcome the opportunity to work more closely with you. And if you have ideas to improve it, bring it on. My name is Tom Krohn, and I'm aware that I'm rare.